Hello and thanks for joining us on the first episode of The Upload. Here we will be discussing all things Microsoft AVD and an exciting new managed service offering from Insentra. Today joining us we've got Tom Hickling, who is a senior program manager at Microsoft and a popular blogger at tomhickling.com. With Microsoft needing no further introduction, we also have John Gallagher, who is our solutions architect at Insentra, and I'm Rob Walker, who is a specialist in end-user computing at Insentra. Here at Insentra, we are a specialist global IT company that is 100% partner obsessed. So guys, thanks for taking the time out to talk around some of the exciting developments in Azure Virtual Desktop. And so Tom, it's been a busy couple of weeks at Microsoft in the desktop space. So we'll just kick off and you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for having me, number one. Always good to chat with some of our partners out there in the coalface. So my role at Microsoft is really just to work with some of our largest customers in the sort of architecture and deployment of AVD, not just to get it deployed, but to get customer feedback. So the customers might have scenarios where they want it to work in a different way than it's currently designed. They want feature requests, so an improvement in the future. They want this widget to work in a different way. So I work with those customers to turn those requests into the language that PMs and developers understand, and then try to drive that through to turn that into a product in the solution ultimately. You're right, it's been a busy time over the last 2 years. It's gone by in a whirlwind, but particularly the last few weeks, we've made a whole host of announcements, which I think we'll probably talk about. It's been, the adoption has been through the roof, and we've been struggling to keep up with the demand from our customers directly and partners and like. So it's a good place to be. It's a good problem to have, and I'm sure it will continue to grow and the service will mature in like manner.
Yeah, and I think you talk about the last 2 years, it has been really interesting. I mean, I think it went GA September 2019, and coming from the Citrix background and EUC stuff. When I think back to the early days of it was, driven by PowerShell, and there was really not much there. But when you think of what's happened in the last 24 months, it's completely phenomenal. One of the interesting changes that's came along recently that everyone's probably aware of is the name change. Going from WVD to AVD. And I think there is some suspicions about why that's happened. Other app delivery companies like Citrix, they've now got the option to do Linux desktops, and I think that's one of the kind of more I guess obvious or guessed upon, is this what's coming? But is there anything else from your side that you could give us some insight to for the sort of background name change of that, going from WVD to AVD?
Yeah. So I think that is probably the number one conclusion that pretty much everybody jumped to. So we've taken Windows out and replaced it with Azure, and that, I think everyone's then interpreted that, does that mean that we will support Linux? Now, so what I can say is not today. The support for Linux has been requested a number of times, and it is definitely registered with the PMs. It's not directly on a deliverable at this point in time. It still has to be assessed. But the name change is much more than just the potential of having Linux desktops. It's really to reflect that Azure is a hyperscale cloud with a list of services as long as your arm. Some of those, in fact, many of those, are applicable to a virtual desktop solution. So we're talking about I suppose the shift from Windows Virtual Desktop being what some might have considered the next evolution that Microsoft has had in our virtual desktop. So, and trying to break that sort of continuum. So this is not the next version of RDS. This is not the next version of Windows Server bringing some new features that RDS has been dependent upon. We've broke the dependency from our service and Windows Server, and then moved it solely onto Azure. Now, Azure, like I said, is this massive platform which provides so much more grunt than just Windows Server ever has done. So what that means is there's that long list of services that we can call on and integrate with now Azure Virtual Desktop. So the typical example there is something that's gone into public preview recently, which is support for Azure AD native. So having the session hosts joined to Azure Active Directory. So we've had Azure Active Directory for, I don't know how many years, 10 years at least it's been around. But we haven't been fully integrated. The service sits behind Azure AD, but the session host still had to be joined to Active Directory. Active Directory is current. That's the best we can call it. It's in some customers consider it legacy, and it will eventually disappear in many years. But the modern way is to authenticate against Azure Active Directory. So we're absolutely making sure that AVD is taking advantage of all of the modern capabilities inside of AVD, inside of Azure. And what that might look like in the future, no one really knows exactly. But the point here is, like I said, there's loads of capabilities in Azure. So one example, which I'm just pulling out of the air, not saying this is on our roadmap, but we've got an IoT service. We've got a machine learning service. What could someone clever do with those products that relate to AVD? So, for example, cars can be IoT enabled, car parks, buildings, security gates. So what happens if Azure was aware when we go back to the office, that is, walking through the security barrier and then powering on more infrastructure to accommodate those users, and vice versa. So when the users disappear, how can we integrate machine learning into that to predict all of this? So that it's all fully managed rather than people having to administer all this. So I think that's really where we're trying to go, that this is not just a virtual desktop service, it's not just VDI. This is a platform of capability that's going to continue to grow, and it's not going to be at the cadence of Windows Server ever was. We could see updates every single day if whilst that is possible, it's not going to be likely that it's every day, but the point is much faster cadence than ever's been possible before.
Interesting, yeah. And I think that the sort of much talked about this week is the release of W365. I've been doing a lot of research, doing some trials. I was lucky to get one before it got limited, shall we say?
Good.
But is there, from your side, what would you say the sort of key differences for anyone out there that hasn't done the research and they've just heard about this much talked about service? You've got AVD and you've got W365. What would you say the key differences and use cases would be between them?
So there are lots of differences. I think they all fall down naturally into two main buckets. Okay, the first one is that Windows 365 is simple, designed to be simple from the get-go. If you have had the chance to deploy, you will see how simple it is to get yourself a virtual machine up and running. I typically refer to Windows 365 as VDI without the I. So we've taken away the infrastructure and you've now just got a virtual desktop. So it's not a solution to migrate a massive, let's just say, Citrix or VMware or AVD solution. You wouldn't migrate that onto Windows 365. The clue is in the name, that it's a PC that's located in the cloud. So what we typically find ourselves doing when speaking to customers is when we go to talk about Azure Virtual Desktop, we're talking to the team that's been doing Citrix, VMware, RDS for what could be 25 years kind of thing. So those people that have created a career just around that capability. When we talk about Windows 365, we're talking to the team that manages physical laptops and desktops and pushing software out, building laptops, shipping them out to wherever the users might be. That's the team that we speak to. And I think that illustrates where the two products align. Windows 365 will always be simple, easy to configure, quick to switch on, all of that kind of stuff. AVD will always be more complex. That complexity, however, brings a whole host of extra functionality that's perhaps not present or not easy to deploy at scale with Windows 365. So they are two different use cases. There will be overlaps and there will be customers that will have both of them, and they might completely mishmash the two together and say, well, they both kind of fit, because you can have single session Windows 10 personal VMs from AVD. So that's a use case that's present in both, but it's really just, I suppose, aligning to what those organizations want, whether they want this simplicity and get it out the door quick, get people productive, or you're a complex organization with 5,000 applications, 2,000 of which have been written on premises and nobody really knows how they work, and you've got a team of EUC people that just make all of that complexity work. That's the first difference. The other one, which is the major difference, at least in my mind, is how you pay for it. So Windows 365 is fixed price per user per month per SKU that you select. So that's great for those organizations that want to be able to know exactly how much they're going to be paying every single month. And, perhaps they've got fixed budgeting. AVD is always consumption based. So you deploy stuff and you deallocate it, we stop charging you. So there's the opportunity that AVD will always be cheaper. Number one, it has multi-session capability. But number two, you can just deallocate everything and we will stop charging you for the compute elements. So you use it, you pay, you don't use it, you don't pay, basically. So you can realize significant cost savings on your Azure bill. But like I said, there's a bit of complexity to set up all the auto scaling and the scripting and the management and infrastructure as code and all that kind of stuff. So I suppose to answer the question, two products designed for different use cases inside of an organization.
I think. Sorry, Rob, when you go.
No, that's super interesting, Tom, to say that. And I know, John, we've done quite a few of these deployments, particularly around in the AVD space, and we've got quite a few more in the pipeline around that. I mean, we talked about complexity a little bit there, Tom, and it being a more complex solution than Windows 365 PC. I mean, John, what kind of challenges have we seen during our deployments of AVD?
I think, in the last year, as it's become more mature, it's been super simple. A lot of the gaps I had between, I don't want to say competitors, but other sort of app delivery type solutions, it's really caught up. With that said, we have partnered with Nerdio, who do an absolute fantastic job of managing AVD. To Tom's point, things around the auto scaling and managing the environment. I shouldn't probably say this, but I managed to pass my AVD exam last week, but as my last couple of deployments, I've used Nerdio, and really it's a case of we'll use Nerdio to deploy and simplify the installation and setup, and then the customer can choose to use that as a tool following that to kind of get that cost benefit, scale up, scale down, and use it also as a service desk tool. And depending on their needs and their size, we can also offer that managed service. So really, lots of the sort of portal access and stuff, I really was, not that used to it, because I'm so used to going, okay, Nerdio, deploy the app service plan, next, click, bang, off we go. But they've done a great job. But I mean, as far as challenges go, I think that depending on the customer and what their experience is, if they were reacting to COVID and they've got to get people spun up, then they're not quite as fussy. If they haven't come from maybe a richer EUC experience in the past, they're totally fine. But I have had some feedback around this. What's this? To Tom's point earlier about the logon, what's this? I mean, I've authenticated, I've got SSO and AD Connect set up. Like, why am I getting this domain services pop up? So that's been a challenge in some cases, but I think that is, maybe it's one Tom can talk to a bit more, but I think that one is getting addressed, and it might be part of the option to do the AD join natively and not have to have domain services, which I think's in preview right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we are currently in public preview for the first of 3 phases of Azure AD Join, or Azure AD Native, whatever we want to call it. That will provide native single sign-on, seamless single sign-on from the client device all the way through into the AVD session, through to any applications that are also being authenticated against Azure AD. So Office is the prime example, but there's, you can integrate lots and lots of applications with Azure AD. So that's currently in preview, and we've got customers previewing that. And like I said, it's in 3 milestones or 3 phases, and it will be delivered over the next 18 months or so. Various capabilities dropping in those 3 phases, and obviously it'll grow over that time. So if anybody wants to see that, I would go and suggest they go and start that preview. It's relatively straightforward. We do have single sign-on today, but it requires ADFS. So going back to my previous point about it being legacy, We also, as Microsoft, recommend customers to not deploy ADFS because it is kind of considered legacy. However, lots of customers have already had ADFS and still do have ADFS in their organization. So if they do, then they might as well make use of it and have single sign-on with AVD.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't, if a customer wanted it now, I wouldn't necessarily say, well, go and do ADFS. I might say, well, hold off and wait a few months until Azure AD Join goes GA and take advantage of that. No infrastructure to deploy, so no cost, no extra complexity.
Sounds great, Tom. With regard to the Azure AD Join only, in that scenario, there's no domain services. That solves, I guess that's the more modern approach. But am I right in saying that leaves a potential issue with using something like FS Logics, which requires, domain services and NTFS permission setup?
Yeah, absolutely. So today in the public preview, we only support personal host pools. That's not to say that we don't support pooled or multi-session host pools. The VMs and the operating system behave identically. The problem is that FS Logics isn't quite there yet. And you use FS Logics on multi-session, so hence why we're kind of limiting or suggesting it's limited to personal host pools. Now the limitation isn't actually FS Logics itself. FS Logics isn't being changed here. It's the Azure Files storage account that the FS Logics sits on.
So the AD joined, yeah.
Correct, yeah. So Azure Files today, you can join to Active Directory. We will we'll very soon be releasing updated code for Azure Files, which is also integrated with Azure AD. And what it will be doing is using this service that we're currently calling AAD Kerberos or Cloud Kerberos. So Azure Files will be looking at AAD to retrieve Kerberos tokens such that FS Logics can then work. So FS Logics is obviously dependent on Kerberos still. And FS Logics isn't going to be updated to support Azure AD natively itself in the short term. So if it sits on Azure Files, which can get the Kerberos tokens from Azure AD, lots of acronyms here, it's all good. So that is due to go into preview in the coming months. So it's not a million miles away. That should just slip into public preview. Like I said, in the not so distant future.
Excellent.
Yeah, that sounds great, Tom. So I know we've done quite a bit of work with FS Logics around AVD, and that solves obviously the profile problem. And I know we've been doing some work around MSIX, John. Do you want to kind of lead us in and tell us a little bit around what additional technologies we've been using around that in order to kind of separate that application layer out from the OS in the same way that we've done with FS Logics and the profiles?
Yeah, sure. So first off, Tom, that's just a wonderful feature. MSIX App Attach, I've really enjoyed getting to know it. I've loved learning it. From my history, I've been through the mill, shall we say, working with applications and packaging them and getting to work. And I think it is one of the common problems you have in these deployments, whether it's Horizon or RDS, Citrix or AVD. You can come in there and leverage the tooling available in the platform. You can build a good solution, but quite often people forget the applications. It's like, okay, it's not just the OS and Office. There's all the additional applications that can sometimes be quite problematic. And I think the compatibility issues, how much images do you have to have? Are they going to perform to expectations? So having App Attach, I think, is really powerful. I have used quite a number of various, app layering and similar technologies in the past. I have had a lot of challenges, some successes, but so far in testing, App Attach has been really cool. I think that once we can get the applications into the format, MSIX, we're good to go. But one of the hardest parts for me was when you go into a larger estate and you've got like thousands of applications, it's like, where do you start? And a lot of the time it's like, let's just leave that to the next cycle, the next project, because it is just too hard. But we have partnered with Remo 3, and these guys do a phenomenal job, at assessing and planning, and first of all, looking at all the applications, and it tells you, is it suitable for multi-session? Is it going to work in MSIX? So lots of that pain and hassle is taken away for you. And then once you've got it in that format, you're sort of off to the races. But really, as part of our managed services as well, we can use the Remo 3 technology so that, yes, if it's multi-session, it's multi-user, and we've got a larger environment, lots of applications, the name of the game is really decoupling the profile, which we've done with FS Logics, and then as best we can, we're never going to get 100%, but we can try and decouple as much of those applications from the OS as possible. So once we do that and we've got those target applications, we can really successfully manage their lifecycle going forward. And it's not a case of, okay, we've got an update in the OS or the application. We can really do an intelligent smoke test and find out exactly, is it going to work? Will it perform quite as well? And we have that, it gives that sense of security for customers, you know, moving to that next phase, whether it be an OS uplift or a new version of said application. Powerful stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's worth mentioning, as you know, end user computing is a unique beast. Let's say there's thousands of users that use virtual desktop, millions, I should say, of users out there, and there's probably millions of applications out there that all have to be merged together to function. And in the past, Microsoft, you know, we have said, you know, we are a partner friendly. In some respects, partner-dependent organisation. So there's lots of Microsoft partners that add value on top of what we do. Citrix, you know, they're a perfect example, but then lots of vendors in the application space. In the past, Microsoft have gone and purchased someone like Softricity to get SoftGrid, which then ended up becoming AppV. MSIX with AppAttach is, you know, the next evolution of that kind of capability. It's early days still. But like you say, there's lots of interest in it and lots of success, lots of issues and lots of problems. And Rimo3 are a fantastic partner in that space, and I would recommend anybody to look at them. And there's lots of other partners out there that are doing a similar type of capability that are adding value in the delivery of those MSIX applications, but also in the packaging or sequencing, whatever terminology you want to use, to do that conversion natively into the MSIX format so that AppAttach will function. So I think there's a lot of value in those vendors and in partnerships with those vendors, both directly with Microsoft, like we see, or with other partners that are partnering with those partners in order to provide a solution to the end customer.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of hard to gauge, I guess, from the outside looking in when you have like an ISV and Microsoft. You guys are pretty huge, right? And you kind of wonder how strong is that relationship, what's actually happening there. And because we partner with Nerdio, which we sort of we love the solution for the project deployments as well as the managed services, but you often wonder, you know, what's actually happening behind the curtain. But when I watched the webinar last night with Scott Manchester and Vadim, I won't try and say Vadim's second name, I'm terrible at it, but Vadim from Nerdio, I mean, that I just thought was an amazing conversation. It really seemed like a strong partnership, and it's a great thing they're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and those partnerships do genuinely go quite deep. So the first time I met Vadim and Joseph was in Redmond. They actually were invited in to come and present. So they were there, did a presentation, and then there was a long queue of people trying to ask them questions and pulling them off here, there, and everywhere. And, you know, they will answer the phone, answer an email to anybody, I think, from Microsoft, to go and have a conversation natively about their product, or they want to help with a customer, whatever it might be. So yeah, those partnerships, they start and then they grow, and then, you know, it just becomes another partnership in this massive family of vendors, partners, customers that exist out there.
Yeah, it's interesting times.
Great company, John. It was just only last night, wasn't it? We were literally on a call when we were just discussing Nerdio, and I pinged Vlad on LinkedIn. Within like seconds, he'd come back and he was answering our queries. It was just incredibly accessible. I had to really call him out for doing that, really. I think it was kind of like 11 o'clock at night in the UK. So obviously, with a lot of the conversations, Tom and John, what we're having around with our customers, it invariably comes back to management and deployment and cost. And certainly we've kind of touched on Cloud PC, Windows 365 in terms of being a fixed cost. And as we know, stuff in Azure is variable and sometimes a little bit predictable in terms of what things are actually going to cost to run that environment. And I know tagging's kind of been about for a while. Is there anything else in that space that's going to come around in terms of being able to manage AVD cost management differently?
So we've got we've got an update to our. Well, I suppose the first thing. So we've got this Insight service, which had a new feature recently, if I remember rightly, that showed you the cost of the storage required for the monitoring service, which is a good feature because people switched this on and then weren't expecting their bill to necessarily go up. But unfortunately, it's another Azure service that does incur charges. That whole service is getting an update itself. So there'll be an Insights version 2 with a whole host of new capabilities. Cost management is always a bit of a difficult one because there's loads of tools for it. We do have in development a native AVD cost management solution. Don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but and it will land in various phases again. So there'll be an MVP kind of approach, and it will mature. But it's designed to give our end customers inside of the Azure portal their AVD cost. It gets complex because some of the infrastructure is shared, so you might have Azure files that's been used for other things and all of this kind of stuff. Networking, obviously, you've got ExpressRoute that's not dedicated for just AVD, so it's difficult to get a specific price. Whilst you can get a specific price for other virtual machines, for example, because that they are dedicated, or this set of VMs is dedicated to AVD, and it's something that customers have been asking for, hence why we're delivering stuff. But we do have a tagging policy which is separate to AVD. That's an Azure service. So I would suggest either customers doing it themselves or working with partners such as yourself to be able to set up some kind of tagging policy today to probably get the best understanding of an AVD specific cost. The only other thing I would add to that is it's not about cost so much as perhaps it's more about price, is that what we typically tend to see is that costs go down. So there was a significant discount, I think which was going back about 6 months, there was a 33% discount in Azure files. We bring out new families of virtual machines. So we brought out a V5 in preview, and my colleague Michelle Roth wrote an article in LinkedIn just to demonstrate what the cost savings we would expect with the V5, because we haven't released the price of that yet. But the price difference from V4 to V3 of this D series of VMs was whatever it was. It was slightly cheaper than the V3. So we got lots of customers just going, well, I'm going to change from V3 to V4 and save some costs. So that's the kind of thing that happens in Azure. We release new VM families, and typically they're cheaper, and they will be quicker because they're on newer hardware within the fabric. So I suppose it's a good place to be for customers because they can just take advantage of these new capabilities and see their costs go down. But I think the piece that they need is to be able to understand what their costs are in the first place. So we will be bringing something out, but there's partners such as yourself directly helping customers to set that up as it is today.
Sounds fantastic, Tom. Did I see that there'd been some changes around sort of licensing for non-enterprise joins around ISVs? I think there'd been an announcement around app streaming and desktops for those particular instances where we're deploying an application out for a customer who's not necessarily an employee or a user in that respect.
Correct. Yes. So that was announced at Inspire, and this was perhaps one of those indications, a small indication of this sort of name change about being more of a platform in the sense of being aligning our capabilities more so with particular use cases out there. The perfect example, and it's not limited to this, but the perfect example is the one you just said. So a software vendor has got some software and they've got 10, 20, 1,000, 1 million customers out there in the world. They want to present that app to them via AVD, either in a full desktop or as a remote app. What this does, there's actually no technology change. This is just a sort of business licensing change. What this does is it enables our customer, so the software vendor in this case, to have a relationship with their customer, so a customer of our customer's customer kind of thing, and they can then charge them whatever they want to present their application, but they have a fixed price per user from us for presenting that. So I think it's $5.50 for a remote app and then $10 for a published desktop. And it means that they don't need the M365 licensing that is a requirement if you're doing this for your internal users. So it's just Azure usage plus this per user fee. So in this instance, AVD customers are getting that fixed price per user per month. That in this context is far more of a requirement for that software vendor because they're sort of the middleman in some respects here. So they want to know their fixed costs so they can then apply fixed costs to their customers and know that they're not going to be sort of losing out anywhere. So yeah, that went GA a couple of weeks back at Inspire. So that's available. And like I said, it's not limited to just software vendors. If you're an enterprise or an organization that has external users to your own, and you want to present that's another use case where this is supported. The current limitation is that you still the software vendor in this instance would need to manage the identities for their customers.
Yeah.
When Azure AD Join goes fully GA, we will also enable at some point Azure AD B2B, which is this concept of inviting guest users from other directories into your directory and then presenting them services. So you don't need to manage Active Directory, or you don't even need to manage their identity. It just exists inside of yours, and then you say, well, this is now, I'm going to give this user an AVD published application, for example, and off they go. We will manage the billing for that and charge the software vendor $5.50 per month for that in that one user context, and it's all good.
Yeah, no, that's super exciting, Tom, because I've got plenty of use cases that actually specifically surround that scenario. So that's fantastic news to hear.
So before we close this out, Tom, just in case anyone wants to get a hold of you or follow what you're doing, where's the best place to go and chat to Tom and find out about the latest updates coming from AVD?
Yeah, so the easiest way is on Twitter, so at Tom Hickling, LinkedIn, just search for Tom Hickling as well. Like you said, I do have a little blog at tomhickling.com, so you can go on there. I try to put some blog posts on there frequently, but it's not as frequent as I like or would like. But basically anything that I find particularly interesting that's perhaps not in our documentation or a different way of doing something, that's the kind of thing that I like to blog about, just so people have got an alternative to sort of our documentation, which sometimes is great, sometimes is not fantastic, or I know that there's a customer out there that wants to do it in a slightly different way, or they've got this issue, so I try to sort of address those corner cases.
Yeah, it's super helpful, Tom. It's always a port of call when we want to know any AVD updates. Tom Hickling's the man to go for. Saves us reading all the long documentation. Great hack there. So it's been fantastic. Thanks very much for coming on today. We'll post a few links up for some of the technologies we've talked about at the end of the video. And thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next episode of The Upload.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.